As officers moved about the house, they noted Lizzie's composure. She did not collapse in grief. She did not wail or curse the killer. Instead, she gave directions, asked questions, and offered explanations. One officer later remarked, "She was cool, calm, and collected, much more than I would have been in her place." When asked about her relationship with Abby, Lizzie hesitated. She admitted she rarely called her mother, referring to her instead as Mrs. Borden. To friends, she confided that she had not spoken to Abby for months, except when necessary. Her dislike for her stepmother became another thread in the tightening net. By late afternoon, Lizzie's sister Emma returned home, having been away visiting friends. She was greeted not by warmth, but by the horror of police officers, blood, and whispers. Emma rushed to Lizzie's side. Neighbors noted how quickly Lizzie leaned on her sister, whispering and clinging. Some believed Emma would shield Lizzie from suspicion. Others thought Emma's presence might reveal cracks in Lizzie's story. Fall River, a bustling mill town, had never seen anything like it. By nightfall, the streets buzzed with rumor. Newspapers across Massachusetts rushed out extra editions. Headlines screamed, "Double murder on 2nd Street. AXE kills Bordens in broad daylight." Journalists painted Lizzie as either a tragic daughter or a cunning killer. Within hours, her face was on every tongue in Fall River. For women especially, Lizzie was a shocking figure. The idea that a respectable, church-going, unmarried woman could commit such violence was nearly unthinkable. Yet for others, it was precisely her outward respectability that made her more dangerous. That evening, Lizzie was questioned at the Borden house. Without a lawyer present, she gave rambling, contradictory answers. She said she had heard a noise, then corrected herself. She claimed her stepmother had gone out, yet Abby's body was upstairs. She shifted the timeline of her barn visit, first saying she was there for 20 minutes, then only a few minutes. Her inconsistencies troubled the police, yet they hesitated to arrest her. Could a woman of her standing really commit such an act? The day after the murders, a seemingly small act raised enormous suspicion. A neighbor later testified that she saw Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove. Lizzie explained it was an old garment, stained with paint. But whispers began immediately. Was it blood, not paint, that she wanted to destroy? The image of Lizzie calmly feeding a dress into the flames became one of the most haunting details of the case. Within days, Fall River split into camps. One group believed Lizzie was innocent, a victim of tragedy, unfairly judged because of her composure. These were largely women, churchgoers, and family friends who saw Lizzie as incapable of violence. The other group saw Lizzie as the only logical suspect. No burglar could have slipped in. No stranger could have avoided notice. Only someone inside the house, someone with motive, could have done it. The police leaned toward the latter view. The case was tightening around Lizzie Borden. The axe had vanished. The motive was murky. Yet 2 bodies lay dead, and the circle of suspicion grew ever smaller. The murders of Andrew and Abby Borden were not just crimes of blood. They were crimes of family, of greed, of resentment buried deep within a locked house. And as Fall River buzzed with gossip and fear, the question echoed through every parlor and street corner. Could Lizzie Borden really have done it? In the days following the murders, Fall River was no longer an ordinary town. 2nd Street had become a spectacle. Curious onlookers passed by the Borden home, pointing toward the shuttered windows where death had come so suddenly. Newspapers sold out by noon, each headline more sensational than the last. The whispers were relentless. Some believed Lizzie was a victim of circumstance. Others were certain she was a killer hiding in plain sight. In every mill, in every parlor, in every church pew, the question lingered. Who had taken up the axe? On August 8, 1892, just 6 days after the murders, Lizzie Borden was summoned to appear at an inquest hearing at the 2nd District Court in Fall River. This was not a trial. There was no jury. Instead, it was a closed-door proceeding led by District Attorney Hosea Knowlton and Judge Josiah Blaisdell. Its purpose, to determine whether enough evidence existed to bring formal charges. But what made this inquest unusual, even controversial, was that Lizzie was not allowed legal counsel. She would face questioning alone. Lizzie entered the courtroom in a black dress, her expression composed, her posture rigid. But inside, she was reportedly trembling. For 3 days, she answered questions under oath, and her answers would shape the case forever. Her story was riddled with contradictions. Where was she when Abby was killed? Sometimes she claimed she was ironing handkerchiefs. Other times she said she was reading in the kitchen. Then she mentioned going upstairs. Each telling shifted slightly. Where was she when Andrew was killed? At first, she insisted she was in the barn for 20 minutes. Then she reduced it to 5. Then she admitted she wasn't certain. Did she see or hear anything? At one point, she claimed she heard a groan or scraping noise. Later, she denied hearing anything at all. Her confusion, some later argued, was the result of morphine prescribed by Dr. Bowen to calm her nerves. But to prosecutors, it looked like a guilty woman weaving tangled lies. Under sharp questioning, Lizzie repeated her claim that Abby had received a note calling her away to visit a sick friend. But investigators had searched high and low. No note was ever found. No messenger was ever identified. No friend in need ever came forward. The phantom note became another nail in the coffin of Lizzie's credibility. At the inquest, prosecutors confronted Lizzie with 2 damning pieces of evidence. First, the hatchet head with the broken handle, found in the basement. Its clean blade seemed suspicious. Some believed it had been washed, then deliberately broken to explain away its appearance. Second, the burned dress. A neighbor swore she had seen Lizzie feed a dress into the stove just days after the murders. Lizzie's explanation, that it had been stained with paint, sounded thin to many. Though circumstantial, these pieces formed the backbone of the case. By the end of her 3rd day of testimony, Lizzie's contradictions had stacked high. Judge Blaisdell was visibly troubled. District Attorney Knowlton pressed harder, sensing the walls closing in. Finally, on August 11, 1892, Lizzie was placed under arrest for the murders of her father and stepmother. The arrest sent ripples through the community. Some reacted with disbelief. The idea that a woman of Lizzie's social standing could be accused of such brutality seemed impossible. Others felt vindicated, certain that justice was finally being served. Lizzie was taken to the Taunton jail, about 15 miles from Fall River. For the first time in her life, she was behind bars. Her cell was small, with iron bars across the window. Her meals were plain. And yet, Lizzie was said to carry herself with the same composure she had shown in court. She looked as though she were in a parlor, one reporter wrote. Not a prison. Through it all, Lizzie's sister Emma remained fiercely loyal. She visited often, bringing books, clothing, and words of encouragement. To Emma, Lizzie was innocent, a wronged sister targeted because she was convenient. Emma's devotion touched some, but it also fueled suspicion. Could Emma have known more than she admitted? Could the sisters have plotted together? Theories swirled, though no evidence ever tied Emma to the crimes. By autumn, the case had exploded beyond Fall River. Newspapers from Boston to New York carried lurid accounts. Illustrations of Lizzie appeared in print, some showing her wielding an axe, others portraying her as a fragile, wronged maiden. The press framed the case as a battle of archetypes. Was Lizzie a Victorian lady, incapable of violence? Or a cold-blooded killer, her femininity a mask for brutality? This question captivated America, and it would soon play out on the grandest stage of all, the courtroom. In November 1892, a grand jury convened to decide whether Lizzie should be indicted. Witnesses testified again, evidence was presented, and suspicions deepened. But what clinched the indictment was the testimony of Alice Russell, a close friend of Lizzie. Alice recalled the day after the murders, when Lizzie, calm and deliberate, had taken a dress and burned it in the kitchen stove. Alice's words struck like a hammer. On December 2, 1892, Lizzie Borden was formally indicted on 2 counts of murder. She would stand trial. As the year turned cold, Lizzie sat in her cell awaiting the trial of the century. Outside, opinion was divided, gossip was relentless, and headlines grew bolder. The stage was set for a courtroom drama that would reveal not only the details of the murders, but the fears, prejudices, and fascinations of an entire nation. The trial of Lizzie Borden was about to begin. June 5, 1893. The Bristol County Superior Court in New Bedford, Massachusetts was packed to the rafters. Curious citizens, journalists, and society figures crammed inside. It was standing room only. The air buzzed with anticipation. At the center of it all sat Lizzie Andrew Borden. Dressed in somber black, she appeared calm, almost serene, her hands folded neatly in her lap. To some, she looked like a grieving daughter. To others, she was the very picture of a murderess hiding behind a mask of composure. This was no ordinary trial. It was, as newspapers would soon declare, the trial of the century. District Attorney Hosea Knowlton laid out the state's theory. Lizzie Borden had motive. She resented her stepmother Abby and feared her father's wealth might be divided. She had opportunity. Only Lizzie and Bridget were in the house at the time of the killings. And she had suspicious behavior. The story of the phantom note, the inconsistent timeline, the burning of the dress, all pointed to guilt. The prosecution's star evidence came in two grim forms: the skulls of Andrew and Abby Borden. In a shocking moment, Dr. Dolan produced them in court. Their bones bore the marks of the blows, jagged fractures where the hatchet had struck. When Lizzie saw the skulls, she turned pale, swayed in her seat, and nearly fainted. Reporters scribbled furiously. The moment would become one of the trial's most infamous scenes. But Lizzie's defense team, led by George Robinson, the former governor of Massachusetts, countered with precision. They reminded the jury there was no direct evidence linking Lizzie to the murders. No bloodstained clothing was ever found. The hatchet suspected as the weapon carried no traces of blood. And the house had been chaotic after the murders, the crime scene contaminated. They also painted Lizzie as a church-going, respectable woman, unlikely, almost unthinkable, as the wielder of such savage violence. The defense's portrait was not of a killer, but of a daughter wronged by suspicion. Witness after witness testified. Neighbors described Lizzie's calmness. Police officers spoke of her contradictions. Alice Russell told of the burned dress. But cross-examination often weakened these accounts. Memories were uncertain. Stories conflicted. Some testimony sounded more like gossip than fact. The prosecution's case, strong in whispers, was weak in proof. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. The court was silent, every spectator holding their breath. It took only an hour and a half. When the jurors returned, their verdict was clear: not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some gasped in relief, others in outrage. Lizzie herself collapsed in tears, embracing her sister Emma. The acquittal made headlines across the nation. For some, Lizzie was vindicated, an innocent woman saved from wrongful conviction. For others, she was a murderer who had escaped justice, shielded by her wealth, gender, and social standing. Lizzie returned to Fall River, but she was never the same. Though acquitted, she was ostracized by much of the community. She and Emma moved into a grand home on the hill, which they named Maplecroft. But whispers followed her everywhere. Children sang cruel rhymes. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Though inaccurate, the rhyme immortalized the crime. Emma eventually separated from Lizzie, leaving Maplecroft after an argument. Lizzie lived out her years in relative isolation, though she remained financially comfortable. She died in 1927, still in Fall River. She never married, never had children, and never escaped the shadow of those murders. The case was never solved. No other suspect was ever seriously considered. The weapon was never definitively identified. To this day, the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden remain one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The Lizzie Borden case endures because it asks unsettling questions. Could a woman of refinement and respectability commit such a brutal act? Did the justice system fail, blinded by gender and class? Or was Lizzie truly innocent, condemned only in the court of public opinion? Over a century later, the house at 92 2nd Street still stands, now a museum and bed and breakfast. Visitors sleep in the rooms where the murders occurred, hoping to glimpse the ghost of Lizzie or hear the echo of an axe. The story has never died. It lives on in books, films, plays, and songs. It endures because the truth was never found. And perhaps, in the shadows of that old Fall River house, it never will be.